Hi and welcome. I'm Annette Oltmans, founder and CEO of the Men Project. In this workshop titled Unmasking Destructive Blame Shifting, I'm going to define blame shifting and what it looks like. I'll also talk about the motives behind employing blame shifting and the impact that it has on the victim. And finally, I'll equip you with clarity by providing how blame shifting relates to our list outlining manipulative tactics and share ideas for responding when blame shifting takes place. I invite you to join us on this in-depth discussion around blame shifting so you can become empowered and equipped to navigate through it. And even in relationships where the person is not pathological, it's a technique that is used. It's a defensive technique. So let's define it. What is blame shifting? Blame shifting is a form of verbal, psychological, and emotional abuse that occurs when the abuser transfers blame off themselves and assigns the responsibility for a problem onto the victim. This is done by manipulating the truth. Essentially, blame shifting is blaming the victim, or blame shifting is avoiding responsibility. It's a highly motivated tactic, and it's a form of manipulation used to avoid taking responsibility and redirecting or deflecting the responsibility for a behavior that they've done onto the victim. It is deception, and it is a form of deflection. When the victim raises a reasonable complaint or concern or expresses a hurt regarding the abuser's behavior, rather than discussing the issue productively and with reciprocity and a mutual desire to understand one another, the focus of the problem gets turned around so that it becomes the victim's fault. Blaming the victim places the lion's share of the responsibility for the relationship on the victim. It's one thing to avoid responsibility, but assigning responsibility to the victim, or even saying the victim is the one who is abusing or is the one who's, like, for example, in pathologizing, they'll actually say that the victim is guilty of some psychological term, and so many other things that we'll get into. Okay, so before I dig into it more, I want to ask you a question because I'd love to hear your comments. Can you think of a time that you experienced blame shifting? Has the blame or a conflict or problem been placed on you? Have you been made to be responsible for things that have confused you? Like when it happens, you actually might not recognize it right away. It just causes confusion. Or has the one causing harm said something like, I wouldn't have done such and such if you didn't say or do blah, blah, blah. Take a moment to let me know by placing your comments in the chat, because I would love to hear some of your examples. Yeah, like take a moment and just think about that. And if you can't think of anything now, I mean, we haven't gotten into the topic yet. You're probably going to think of more later, but I just wanted to see if any of you were aware and what examples you might have.
Annette, we have a number of responses now, so I'll go ahead and read them to you.
Sure.
That's great. More are coming in, and it just bumped me down to the bottom. Here we go. Yes, even significantly, even this last weekend and today. Constantly, my point is deflected, and I'm blamed in some way. Classic topic change. By taking something in the complaint that is not the issue and making it the issue, saying, well, what about XYZ? So
that's a perfect example of deflection. It's another way to blame you and to take the focus off of them. And to respond to the other comment, blame shifting, you know, we all can be caught off guard and find ourselves feeling uncomfortable and defensive in the moment and blame shift. But those of us that have good intentions will catch ourselves and we'll stop it and we'll reframe and respond appropriately. But those who are pathological or deeply entrenched into this covert emotional abuse, these hidden forms of manipulative tactics, will do it regularly. It'll be a pattern that you will be able to recognize. Any other comments?
Yes, we have at least a handful. So here's
Okay.
it says it's always my fault. And then another one is every discussion with my husband, this happens. He always answers the question with a question. He never answers. When my partner and I argue, I express that I do not like him raising his voice at me. And he says, I wouldn't have to raise my voice if I didn't have to repeat myself.
Oh,
The classic example that you might.
yeah. Talk about
Yes.
blaming you and not taking responsibility for the fact that he's raising his voice. We don't need to raise our voice ever.
Okay. Another one says, I went out with someone else because we broke up with a question mark, and it says, but we didn't. Oh, so that's what the partner's saying. I went out with someone else.
So that's a false accusation, which is a form of blame shifting.
Annette, we have like almost 15 more I can go through. Do you want me to read through them quickly?
Just let's do a few more.
Sure thing. Okay, which is amazing, by the way. We love.
Thank you for being responsive. I really appreciate it. Everybody benefits from it.
Absolutely. And that's what I was going to say. Even if I don't read it out loud, everyone in the chat finds comfort knowing they're not alone and they're not crazy, that this is actually a tactic that so many experience. Okay, so another one says, I pointed out that my husband got the things he wanted, freely spent money on what he wanted, and he said, you're the one who gets your way all the time. Caught suspicious emails, then blames for looking at his email.
Oh, that's so classic.
I reported sexual harassment about my boss, and he blamed me that he could not hire who he wanted because of it, and that it limited his future career opportunities.
Wow. Oh boy.
Yikes.
That's serious.
Mm-hmm.
Not that the other ones aren't serious, because they're so damaging. It's like an assault on your brain when somebody blame shifts you.
Yes. Oh, there's so many. When I tried to talk to my husband, when I try to talk to my husband about, and then it says he responds to me with yelling and raging, and he tells me it's because I trigger him.
Oh boy. Well, we have to be responsible for how we respond. You're not responsible for his reactions. We aren't supposed to react. We're supposed to take a deep breath and thoughtfully respond. That's each of our own responsibility, how we communicate with someone else.
I don't mean to laugh, but I think I have another 15 more that just came in.
So, guys, so see, we all have experienced it. Basically, it's so toxic. So I'm going to read all of them. If I don't get to them today, I'm going to read through all of them at the end of our time together. And Jill, if there's something that really stands out to you, just go ahead and speak up and we'll talk about it.
Sure thing.
Anyways, there's so many ways, as you can hear, that blame shifting or blaming the victim can look and sound. It can look like, I wouldn't have said this if you didn't do that, which I've already mentioned. Or you made me angry, so I pushed you. You shouldn't antagonize me the way you do. If the victim shares how they have been hurt, the blame shifter might tell the victim, you're too sensitive. Or they may even blame the victim for being triggered. We heard that already. Using their vulnerabilities or reactions against the victim to pile on responsibilities for problems in the relationship that doesn't belong to the victim. If he's triggered or she's triggered, that's their responsibility to work on their triggers. That's something they need to work on. They don't get to just vomit on some, that's so destructive. Another example of this can be more subtle. For example, when the victim says something like, I just overheard you coordinating a golf game with your friends, but you promised you weren't going to play golf this Wednesday. so that we could spend quality time together. And then the spouse might reply, I've worked hard this week. Nothing I do makes you happy. So it's a subtle way, but it still is putting blame on the victim. He's dismissing his responsibility to keep his word while conveying that something is wrong with the victim's attitude, being too sensitive and self-centered, while blanketing her with an all-encompassing statement like, nothing I do makes you happy. In this example, you can clearly see how the victim would then become confused and made to even feel guilty. Like, do I act like nothing makes me happy? It's a very effective and destructive form of communication. The victim can even be blamed for their partner's bad habits, such as raging. We've heard that example, drinking, using drugs, and other bad habits. If there was an affair, the blame shifter may blame the victim for being closed off to intimacy, which if you're not being treated emotionally well, of course you're going to be closed off to intimacy. So it's such a, such a deep, intimate assault on a person when they betray their partner and then blame them for the reasons why. And unfortunately, I see a lot of therapists doing this when there's been an affair, where they ask the victim, well, what is your part? As though she has any part of stepping outside the marriage. They may, if they've had an affair, they may accuse the victim of not taking care of themselves, or blame the affair on various other reasons rather than taking ownership of the lack of integrity and the lack of faithfulness. The blame shifter may also blame the victim for financial problems. For example, the abuser may demand that the wife not work on one hand, and then he makes irresponsible choices with their finances and contradicts himself by blaming the wife for not working. So on one hand, he says, I don't want you to work. And then when he's irresponsible, he blames her for not working. In blame shifting, the abuser converts the victim's reasonable concerns and so forth into being the victim's fault. If you'd stop doing XYZ, then I wouldn't do ABC, or you're too critical, etc. Psychology today, I think this is interesting, says there are five common blame shifts. So the first one they say is pretending it was a joke. You're too thin-skinned, or you're too sensitive. If there is an audience and you look distressed, someone will wiggle out by calling you too sensitive. This is so common, rather than owning that their joke was inappropriate. In fact, one of the first signs of an abusive relationship is when there's derogatory jokes at somebody's expense, because it actually requires more intellect to come up with a joke that everybody can enjoy and laugh at, and it's not laughing at someone. So take note that when you see people putting down others and turning it into a joke. Now, I know that some guys do this to each other. It's, like in fraternities, and maybe it carries through their lifetime. It may have a place in certain circumstances if they all do it to each other and they think it's funny. But when it's done in opposite sex relationships, or if the person doesn't like it and doesn't want it, then it's abusive. Saying I was only kidding, or minimizing it in any way, is not taking responsibility and is just completely ignoring the fact that they just humiliated you, basically. Number two is making your behavior the cause for abuse. This usually starts with, I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have lost my cool and yelled at you if you didn't. It's usually that sort of thing. We've talked about that one already. It's so common. Number 3 is blaming the abuse on your bad timing and insensitivity. This can look like blaming you for bringing up an issue when it's bad timing. They just got home from work. They have a lot on their mind. Basically, they're trying to get you to believe that no wonder they yelled at you, when in reality, there's no good time to address concerns with someone who refuses to accept responsibility for their wrongdoing. There's no good time because it doesn't matter what time of day it was or what they were doing. They're always going to react the same. So don't fall for that. Or number 4, it's your flaws that make it happen. You always, or you never. So they, make a blanket absolute statement like that, which is really blaming basically shuts down any possibility to have a authentic conversation. They may say, you can't make up your mind ever, and so on. It's a barrage of attacks on various flaws you may or may not have to make you feel bad about yourself. You walk away. Sometimes blame shifting is so quick and subtle that you are the one, and I mentioned this earlier, are confused for a moment. You've just been assaulted in your brain, and sometimes it's traumatizing, so it's difficult to think of what to say or to even organize it in your mind what's actually happening. Okay, number 5 says your constant complaints are the same old issue. So why bother talking? This is to shut the victim up and shut the victim down and put the victim in a downgraded position. This blame shift justifies their stonewalling you, which is blocking you in a conversation, blocking communication. They may ignore you, and it justifies ignoring you or pretending you haven't said a word. They just are monotone and flat. They may say something like, if you're so unhappy, then why don't you just leave? That is such a huge statement. They're talking divorce. They are catastrophizing the situation, blowing it out of proportion while they heap all that responsibility onto you. So make no mistake, these are all forms of verbal abuse. He or she knows you aren't ready to leave, and he or she also knows you are desperate for an answer or resolution to the problem at hand. That's why this form of blame shifting works. They don't care about how you feel. They don't care what you think. They're going to determine the narrative. They're going to redefine your motives and your thoughts. It could be that you're not thinking anything like what they're laying on you, but they're going to tell you what you're thinking. It's really disruptive, and you're going to feel it in your body. Blame shifting is a defensive strategy for maintaining power and control. The goal is to keep you in a downgraded position, and if you aren't prepared, it will work to the abuser's advantage. As it happens repeatedly, because remember I said it's usually a pattern that you will see play out over and over, blame shifting can be crazy making, because I've mentioned catastrophizing, joking, blaming you for something, that false accusations. Blame shifting can take place in so many manipulative behaviors. So it becomes so crazy making that you have a hard time wondering what is happening. It's like you will tend to feel responsible for what happened unless you're able to really identify that their narrative is rewriting your narrative. Another way of saying this is gaslighting. So that's another term. And for those of you who aren't familiar with our materials, on our website, on our resource page, we have a long list of terms and definitions describing various methods for manipulation. And I so highly recommend that you go to this list and really familiarize yourself with it so that you're not blindsided when these behaviors are employed against you. And you can look at this list and consider this talk today about how blame shifting can intertwine with each one of these behaviors. It's also a typical example of the acronym DARVO. Now, I don't know if all of you have heard of DARVO, D-A-R-V-O, which stands for deny, attack, and reverse the place of the victim with the offender. So the offender denies, then they attack by blaming you, and then they even act as though they are slighted. So suddenly they're the victim and you're the offender. It's crazy making. And it's something that is in every abusive relationship. So look for that. Deny, a manipulator will deny any wrongdoing and refuse to take responsibility for what they have said or done. They may minimize your concerns, downplay them, or completely deny it happened in a lie. Then they attack. The manipulative individual may attack in a way that blames the victim for what happened or the situation they find themselves in, or they may bring up something entirely different. They do this by exaggerating, distorting the truth, or coming up with lies and stories of things that never happened, as we mentioned in false accusations. This is all done in an effort to shift the blame and focus off the manipulator and off their actions in an attempt to blame the victim for the harm to the relationship, while the abuser then plays the victim. It's absolutely dismantling. You'll feel like if you were standing on solid ground, the ground is now moving and you don't have solid footing in the conversation. And it can be so confusing to the one on the receiving end because it just reframes the entire situation, leaving you to feel bewildered and full of self-doubt, unless you become really adept at identifying this when it's happening. Okay, reverse victim and offender. I'm still talking about DARVO here. At this stage, the manipulator flips the script so that they become the victim and the real victim becomes the offender. Denying responsibility and blaming the victim allows the manipulative person to place themselves in a position where they can gain the sympathy of the victim or outsiders, which is really unnerving, while diverting any attention away from their own harmful behavior. So imagine that this is done in public or in a family situation. It's effective. So often outsiders will buy into the blame shift. Those that are emotionally intelligent are going to see it for what it is. But many of us don't have a high level of emotional intelligence. We haven't learned the language to properly describe these situations. And so when you lack the words to understand them, you can't see them. And so it completely blindsides you. It will cause the victim to become confused and full of self-doubt. It is psychological abuse. No two abusers are precisely alike. So we heard some examples, and some were similar and some were very different. There's so many nuances, but you can rest assured that playing the victim or using DARVO is a commonality used by all abusers. So just think about that. And you can Google it and read more about it. Some abusers may also blame the relationship as a whole for causing various problems in the abuser's life. And that's really hurtful because it just undermines the value of your relationship, of your marriage, or of your boyfriend, girlfriend relationship, or it could be a friendship even, where they just make this blanket statement that tells you they don't value the relationship. ultimately, when blame shifting tactics are employed repeatedly, they can keep victims from sharing their experiences with a safe person and seeking help. That's what they desperately need to do. That's what you need to do, is to seek help from a safe person who will understand what's happening and who validates you. They will also help you gain a more accurate perspective. You need that validation. You need that connection. You're not getting it from your partner, and you need it from someone, because we can't heal in isolation. We can't heal while we're constantly being abused. We have to have someone, or more than just one, people that are safe in your life. And if you don't have someone safe, a safe friend or a safe family member, I really recommend that you reach out to a domestic violence agency and speak to a counselor there, or an advocate, or if you can find a therapist that's knowledgeable in narcissistic abuse, have someone that you can talk to in a safe setting. When raising a reasonable complaint or concern or a hurt, the opposite of blaming would be to have a sense of curiosity. What do I mean by that? Tell me more, honey. I don't really understand fully why this is so upsetting to you, but I want to understand. So explain that to me. Or they're going to show you concern. I can see why that would hurt you. I'm sorry. I need to work on my reactions. Or they're going to actually be so empathic that they're going to feel some of the hurt that you're feeling, because they don't want you to be uncomfortable. That's what a healthy relationship looks like. It's to have a desire to understand more why you're feeling the way you're feeling. Seeking a deeper understanding of your thoughts and feelings is a healthy response. And it's what we all should strive for in our intimate relationships. Mutual understanding brings forth healthy emotional intimacy and emotional safety. It's not healthy for your mind and your body to be entrenched with somebody, to be in relationship with somebody who is not seeking. Well, let me say this differently. I'm going to change the way I'm going to say this. If you're with somebody who is never taking responsibility and they're blaming you, these are like you're being punched in the head. It's that disruptive. So you want to have somebody that is emotionally safe. Now, you can have a lot of friendships and family members that aren't necessarily unsafe, but they're not somebody that you're going to confide in. And that's okay. You can enjoy them. You can celebrate their good parts and put limits on the parts you don't like so much by not opening up, by not sharing intimate parts of your life or sharing any vulnerabilities. Guard your vulnerabilities, guard your heart, and just enjoy it more on a superficial level. But with your intimate partner, the whole goal is to be constantly increasing emotional intimacy and emotional safety. Okay, so how can you handle or respond to blame shifting, or DARVO, when it's used? First, I want you to think about trusting your intuition. Your instincts are deeply embedded inside of you and give you good information that you can trust. But this might sound contradictory to how you're feeling a lot of self-doubt, because when somebody is constantly blaming you, it does cause you to doubt yourself, and you develop, I'm going to get into this a little bit more, but there's a disconnect between your intuition and between reality and what you're internalizing as your fault. So there might be a time when you can't really trust your intuition, but you will feel it in your body, and you can trust that. Your body will know. If you feel anxiety, if you feel trauma, if you feel really triggered, this is a sign for you to listen to and to question and say, why am I feeling this? What's going on here? That will connect you with your intuition. You might not necessarily trust your gut feelings, but you will if you really listen to your body. Your nervous system will send you strong cues that you need to learn to notice and listen to. For example, this is how it might manifest in your body. Your stomach might feel tense or tight, or you might feel a little bit nauseated, or your neck and jaw might tighten. Some people, the stress, it immediately goes to their upper spine. Or it could be that you just feel a sense of exhaustion and weariness, where you just feel where you feel hopeless. You'll likely feel anxious. If you can't entirely pinpoint why, listen and notice that anxiety. We all know the feeling, how awful it feels to be anxious. And that's definitely something that almost anyone in this situation is going to feel. So really start to hone in on when you're feeling anxiety and consider why it's happening and validate that for yourself. It's not your fault. You shouldn't take it on. Don't beat yourself up. It's the other person's problem. Next, becoming educated and obtaining clarity while staying grounded in reality is essential. As we've talked about blame shifting, it can take many forms. So go to those terms and definitions on our website. There's many manifestations of manipulation, and it's so helpful. I recommend that you study that list, that you print it off. You can download it for free in PDF fashion. You can study that list. And if you are somebody who journals, a lot of people do journal arguments just to help them get a sense of reality, because the narrative is constantly being rewritten by your partner. You can compare the list to your journal entries and see how many behaviors. You can start to recognize the patterns in that, those go-to behaviors that your partner is employing. The more familiar you become with the terms and definitions, the more clarity you will gain. Clarity is the antidote to confusion and self-doubt. Clarity, we can't solve a problem if we don't clearly understand what the problem is. So clarity is something that is going to calm your trauma, calm your anxiety, and really minister to yourself. Keep track of any time the tactic is used. It can be so helpful to document what happens when it happens, especially if it's creating doubt and confusion. Just write it down. Write down what happened. You might be so traumatized in the moment that you can't clearly see the full picture. You won't be able to look in objectively, but later when you've calmed down, you'll be able to read it and say, oh my gosh, that's what was happening. So it's really helpful to write things down and keep it in a safe place that your partner can't read. Reading back what you wrote is going to counter that false narrative that's been imposed upon you. If it's safe to do so, deal with the issue as soon as possible with the abuser in a way that you only speak facts and stay focused on the issue at hand. So this is a way to respond. Confront it, deal with it in real time. If you aren't traumatized, I would wait. I would try to not react, which is so hard, because for me, when I was going through this, my trauma will manifest in fight, flight, freeze, or appease mode. My most common response or reaction, I should say, traumatic reaction, was to fight. So I would engage. It's such a waste of time, and it only traumatizes you more, because they're not going to validate you no matter how smart you are in what you say. They're not going to validate you, but you can start to put limits by calling things out for what they are. Know that they're going to react defensively. They're going to deny that they said what they said. They're going to deflect again like they did the last time. and they're going to minimize you in order to try to maintain control and avoid responsibility. But you don't have to engage in that. You can simply call it out for what it was. You're blame shifting me, you're changing the topic, you just name it. Look at your list, get familiar with the terms, and just state the point. While you're doing that, this conversation is over, but it's not finished. It's not done, but it's over for now. Exit the room. Or you can put bigger boundaries, whatever you're comfortable with. Sometimes it's hard for us to set boundaries because we get afraid of their reaction. They retaliate against us, and we don't want to feel that. We want peace in the home. We want emotional connection. We want calm. But as you get stronger, you'll be able to set stronger boundaries. So I say start with baby steps. Maybe you leave the room for 20 minutes. Maybe you, as you get stronger, you lock your bedroom door, put your partner's clothes outside, and you don't allow them into the bedroom. There's so many boundaries that it's so personal that only you can decide what's appropriate for you. But it's good to set a boundary by saying, if you do that to me again, I'm sleeping in our bedroom and you're not invited in. You can say that, but don't say it unless you're going to actually follow through. Because if you set a boundary and you don't follow through, it just weakens your position. So that's why I'm saying take baby steps. Only set boundaries you feel you can follow through with the consequences. And you don't have to always tell them in advance what your boundary is going to be. You can just set the boundary and fulfill the consequence right then and there if you want to. I'm just giving you different options. Limit your contact and disengage. That it's really important to not get sucked into the vortex where now it's this crazy making circular conversation where you're not getting anywhere. That's why I kind of recommend holding up your hand, because it sends a signal. Now that might not work for you. I remember when I was in couples therapy, it was with an abuse expert. They had my husband and myself sit in the room. They brought the male therapist brought in a female therapist, and they modeled what a boundary looked like. And I remember she stood up and she just basically said, "This conversation is over. That's what I want you to do." And it was so great for me to see that, because I felt like I wanted to be soft and feminine, and I didn't know that how far I could take it, because my husband was always blaming me anytime I set a boundary. So I had all this self-doubt. I was so beaten down, and it modeled for him, this is appropriate behavior. So quit vilifying her if she does it. You deserved it. And so it was a really healthy exercise. Anyways, moving on. Similarly to how we see DARVO is much like blame shifting. And it's closely connected to various other covert behaviors that we've been talking about. I've mentioned deflection. I've mentioned gaslighting, where it can look like they're rewriting the narrative, causing you to doubt your perspective and memory. It's so common. You're suddenly blamed for something in the narrative that you never said or did. It's just completely false, which leads to false accusations, which false accusations are really traumatic. Think if somebody falsely accuses you of doing something, it's pretty overwhelming, because suddenly now you feel like you have to explain yourself and prove that you're not guilty of what you're being accused of. So it happens to be really triggering. Let's say you're in a couples therapy. This happened to me, so I'm using this example because I'm really familiar with it. I'm in a couples therapy, and I don't recommend couple therapy, but before I learned all of that, I was in couples therapy session, and my spouse used a thread of truth, but completely distorted the facts, blaming me for something that I never said or did. And so it was so unnerving, because yes, we were in the restaurant at so-and-so time and so-and-so was with us, but then completely disorients the rest of the narrative. So it was so overwhelming to try to overcome that when there's partial truths to, like I raised an issue and then he would come back with a false accusation. It was really disconcerting for me. So false accusations is one. Defend yourself. The focus should be on the truth and just speak it. But if you're triggered, it's going to be hard to do that. So really look and think about false accusations and how they will affect you and ways that you can respond by just simply speaking the truth. That is a lie. I'm not going to allow that false narrative to take place. What actually happened was this. When you are really clear and concise in the way you communicate, it's so much more effective than getting emotional and arguing the point. You just be firm and calm. And it's so hard to do when you're traumatized, but it's a goal to strive for. Scapegoating is another way blame shifting gets employed. And this is really disruptive because this is when they distort the truth to outsiders, such as friends or family members. They mischaracterize your motives and your actions, or said another way, redefine reality. So you're viewed by others as being at fault. And scapegoating often can happen behind your back, where, something like, well, nothing, I try so hard, but nothing I do ever makes my wife happy. So that characterizes you as a constant complainer. And people, if I love when Scott Peck wrote a book called People of the Lie, and he talked about how damaging white lies are when it's not something like I stole something or I cheated on a test. It's a little more slippery than that those constant little white lies are much more damaging because you can't overcome it. You can't address it. It's trickling out on a constant basis. So it undermines your character, your whole persona. So you have no credibility when you try to clarify something because they already view you as somebody that you aren't really. You're somebody different. So let's see. I'm going to move forward. Disavowal, where they diminish what you value and instead blame you for what you value. Let's say that you decide to go back to school to further your education, and rather than support you in your efforts towards self-improvement, to maybe help increase your earning capacity in your house, you're blamed for being selfish, for taking the money to pay for school and so forth. Or blame shifting is also a part of rationalizing and excuse making. It's also a power play or a power over, where they dominate over you to keep themselves off the hook. Okay, I mentioned catastrophizing before, where they blow things out of proportion. So if you consider all of these behaviors that I just went through, that blame shifting is connected to, you may have realized that some of these tactics are a form of projection, where the abuser uses to avoid unwanted feelings that they're internalizing within themselves. What do I mean by that? A common form of projection occurs when an individual, threatened by their own angry feelings, accuses the other for harboring angry thoughts. It's so confusing, but it's really, they're blaming you for things that they're doing themselves, said in simple terms. It's mired in denial. And the acronym that someone came up with about denial is, don't even know I'm a liar. So they're not even aware of it. It's just so deeply embedded in them. It's an unconscious process that serves to protect their discomfort or anxiety. And I'm going to rush through this part. A lot of abusers have a low emotional IQ, meaning they're uncomfortable with emotions. They weren't raised in a way that really developed their feelings and emotions, where they were validated and given the language to describe different emotions, doubt, worry, concern, not just happy, sad, anger, but the more subtle emotions. And so they're uncomfortable with emotions, not just your emotions, but their own emotions. So when you bring up anything emotional, they get a lot of anxiety and anger and shut it down. Their motive is to control and stop. And your motive is to have empathy, to obtain emotional safety and connection. So theirs is to dominate. They want to win arguments. They don't want to have a mutually beneficial solution. That doesn't enter their mind because they don't value your feelings. They're uncomfortable with your feelings, and they don't have empathy for your feelings. They don't care about your feelings. They might cerebrally, in a good moment, say, well, I do care and I love my wife, but they don't care when you're sharing your emotions. They just want to shut you down and dominate you and win the argument. So it's very different. And it's because they are embedded in what we call the pillars of abuse, which is a sense of entitlement. They feel entitled to double standards, a faulty belief system, which means something like patriarchy would be a faulty belief system where they believe a man believes he's in a hierarchical position than a woman. He might not communicate it, but he believes it in his being. Image management, which is where they care about how they look to others, but there's something very different behind closed doors. And then the last one is a lower emotional IQ or a very low emotional IQ. Okay, we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to, let me just check my notes because I want to get to the most important part. Okay, so the dynamic of blame shifting often leads to the victim assuming the role of cognitive dissonance. I talked about this in a different way a little earlier. Cognitive dissonance is where you don't view your circumstances accurately. Remember when I was talking about intuition? You are not in touch with your intuition. You are buying into the narrative, or you maybe in the past, you bought into the narrative that your spouse was projecting onto you, the false narrative. So there's a cognitive dissonance means there is a cognitive, a thinking disconnect between what is accurate and what isn't accurate. You are believing the lies being told to you, or you are believing part of it. You aren't seeing the full picture for what it accurately is, that you are being emotionally abused. And so you might have a really hard time regulating your emotions. You might experience mood swings or outbursts of anger, or you may feel that you're losing your mind and your memory. You may start journaling or tape recording to document what happened so that later when your abuser changes the narrative, you have proof of what happened and you're going to say, I wrote this down. It's like your backup plan. I don't recommend that you share your journaling with your partner. I recommend that that be a part of your own work to get stronger and clear on yourself. But I do recommend journaling and putting dates down. And I do recommend tape recording, even though it's illegal in some states, tape recording to share with a therapist or to share with a friend that you really trust, or just to play back for yourself so you can make sense out of this confusing dynamic, that this conversation that happened. It can really help you. And also tape recording violence, tape recording raging can be really helpful if you ever need to call the police. Having a record of that is really valuable. Or let's say you're in the car and your spouse is raging. Well, first off, I recommend calling 911 so they hear, secretly below your seat, you call 911 and let them hear the raging, and then follow it up with a phone call documenting, because that is dangerous. You're in an endangered situation when somebody is driving erratically and doing that sort of thing. So I really recommend documenting things. You have to with a blame shifter. They'll say anything or do anything. to not take responsibility and to blame you. And if you ever decide to separate or leave, they're going to really blame you. So you need to have documentation and be prepared for that. You need to have proof to counteract the false accusations. So let me, I want to go into another response that I wanted to say. If you, I mentioned that clarity is the first step to healing. It calms your confusion, and confusion is very stressful. So when you calm your stress, you calm your trauma. You can choose to disengage, like I said, and you can also say what you're saying is not accurate. So I'm stepping away. I'm not buying your bull. This is not true. It's safe to do that. Unless they're a violent person, then you have to be your own best advocate and determine what's safe and what isn't, and what you're prepared to deal with as a counteraction. But the stronger you get, the more effect you will have. You can say, you've broken my trust because you're lying or you're not taking responsibility. There's so many things that you can say that are going to paint the situation accurately. And so I encourage you to do that. I'm just streaming through, so I'm sorry it's a little broken. I want to encourage any of you to sign up for our course on our website. If you haven't taken it, it's a self-paced course. It was designed to be taken over 4 weeks, 1 hour of reading a week, and a 1 to 2 hour recorded session with me. It will jumpstart you on your healing journey. It will save you about a year's worth of therapy, of processing through and ruminating through these things. If you just take this course, and you can take it as fast or as slow as you'd like. I mean, some of you could finish it in a day, where others might want to take several weeks, but it is so helpful. And the comments that we put so much work into preparing this. We beta tested it with so many victims and survivors and therapists, et cetera. And I feel really proud of this. And I know that it will really help you have a new outlook on life. It will give you so many tools and resources, and educate you. Instead of having to read 1,000 books, it will, and I encourage reading and I encourage listening to podcasts, but it will jumpstart you on that process and put you way ahead of the healing, your healing process. So now, as I wrap up, I'll take your questions and I'll stay on as long as I need to. Okay, I'm sorry I ran so close to the end if some of you have to leave.
Okay, Annette, and I think we might only have about 5 minutes. Do you have to be somewhere? I just want to make sure that in case we say
No, I can take the questions. I know what time it is. Yeah, I'll stay on.
Okay,
Yeah.
wonderful. I just want to make sure. Okay, we have a very full chat. I did say this in the chat in case you didn't see it. As I'm finding the questions here, it is amazing that you all have shared so much. Many people have felt seen, understood, validated by everything Annette has shared, and also by seeing all of your experiences in your pain. There has been healing and comfort for others. And so we really appreciate you taking the risk to share all that you have.
I so appreciate it. I want to say I am so sorry that you are going through this. For those of you who are, it is so painful and you feel so alone and exhausted. I remember what that felt like. It was devastating. And I'm just so sorry you're going through this. But I want to tell you, with that said, there is hope. There are so many that have gone before you, thousands and thousands of victims that have come through and gone through to the other side. Whether you decide to stay and emotionally disengage, or whether you decide to leave, to seek a better life, there is hope for you. You can get so much stronger. And so I so encourage you to educate yourself, like listening to workshops like this and podcasts and reading and taking our workshop. I really, not our workshop, our comprehensive, our self-paced comprehensive course. I really recommend that you keep educating yourself. You will grow. It will affect you in a positive way because there is hope. It doesn't have to be this way. You can't change your abuser, but you can change your own, you can change yourself and become stronger. Okay, so I won't talk anymore. I'll just wait for questions.
Okay, here's a question, Annette. My husband enters a room and then finds something wrong with something. For example, there's a spot on the door that's sticky, etc. He announces it to me and I feel like he is blaming me. How can I figure out if he is inferring blame or if he is just making a statement and that one of us has to decide how to clean it up? I get uncomfortable and I feel blamed, but maybe I am off base.
No, you're not off base, but my goal for you is that you're more confident, that you can say, are you blaming me for the sticky spot on the door? If it bothers you, go get a washcloth and clean it. Why do you have to take all that on? Sorry, my phone is making a buzzing sound. You don't have to take that on. Don't take it on. Start working internally with yourself to not buy into that. Say, yeah, something bumped the door. Was it you? Would you like to clean it? If he says it in a nice way, honey, there's something sticky on the door, you can say, okay, well, thank you for letting me know, but there's a washcloth right there in the bathroom. You can wipe it off. It's okay. You don't have to take on these things. You might want to be nicer and say, okay, thanks for letting me know. I'll clean it off, but not if it's done in a critical way. Do not give them that. Don't take that on yourself. Don't, you are your best advocate. Don't burden yourself with their garbage. Just release it. I don't mean just, I say that too much. I don't mean to minimize it. Release it, release it. Don't take it on. Be strong. You might not be strong today, but with that goal, you can be stronger tomorrow and the day later and the week later and the month later. It's something to work towards. Thank you for that.
Yes, yes. Annette, do you have any advice on how to deal with blame shifting in court? For instance, my ex likes to testify that I, quote, think these things are happening to me to convince the judge that he did not do it.
Think these things are happening to me, that you're thinking these things are happening to you when they're not actually happening.
Correct. Think is all caps.
And so usually you don't really have that much opportunity to speak to the judge in court. It's mostly done through attorneys. But if there's a trial going on, or if you're in a courtroom where the judge is asking you questions, then that's all the more reason to show documentation so that you can prove what you are claiming. Do whatever you can do to validate, to verify what you're complaining about. And let me just think for a minute. You can also say, if you're allowed to speak, this is a typical pattern that I deal with. Something actually happens, and then my ex denies that it happened, but it happened. And my kids experience, or whatever it is, this is happening, it's a pattern, and then he denies it is also a pattern. Sometimes it really helps to speak what the behavior is from our terms and definitions. Speak it calmly and concisely. Don't get stressed and upset, and don't let your trauma cause you to react or to cry or to shake. Really go in there with a sense of resolve. If you have to take some calming vitamins or whatever you need to before you go into court, do whatever it takes to help you. Have somebody give you a pep talk. Be prepared for the worst so that you can respond in a really calm way and just name it for what it is. That's what I recommend if you don't have documentation, or if with documentation, either way. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Annette.
I also recommend that you go to Dr. Cocciola her website about coercive control because she has a lot of good tips for the courtroom. How to deal with a narcissistic spouse, especially if you have kids.
Yes, she's a fantastic resource. Okay,
Yeah.
next question. How do you deal with it when you're traumatized and the little white lies behind your back are going to family, friends, therapists, etc.? And then bad advice is coming back from those folks and being accepted by the spouse.
When people give bad advice, I would just simply say, I'm not gonna, this is not true. It's a complete lie, or it's a distortion of the truth. And so I'm not going to talk about it. It's not that I don't care what you think, but you don't have the full picture. So I'm choosing to not discuss it. You don't have to get their approval. You are your own adult. You are not the child. Even if you're the daughter or son of somebody, you are not a child. You are an adult. You do not need other people's approval. And if your therapist is buying into this stuff, I would leave that therapist, or I would refer them to our website or print off the terms and definitions and some other documents on our website, take a screenshot or whatever you need to do to educate them. But I don't recommend couples therapy. It's actually contraindicated, meaning it's not recommended when any form of abuse is present. But if your therapist is not understanding emotional abuse and completely aligning with you 100%, then you are in the wrong place. There are people out there that get it and that will, let me say it this way. Abuse is a choice and it's not a mistake. It's not your fault. No part of it is your fault. So they should be aligning with you 100%. No other problems in the relationship can be worked out until abuse is confronted and resolved with reparations commensurate with the harm done over a long period of time. It takes, an apology is not enough. There needs to be proof of reparations and real contrition over an extended period of time. Otherwise, it is just too traumatizing to be in a crazy making therapeutic session where then you have two people against one. You don't need that. I would rather see you go to therapy on your own and learn skills to get stronger rather than be in couples counseling. I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you, Annette. I have over 30 more things in the chat here, Annette, but I'm going to read you one more question, and then I'm going to scroll through while you're answering to make sure that, we try to get to all of these questions. It's amazing.
I'm sorry that we're not getting to everything. I'm hoping I can answer the questions.
Yeah, amazing how much this has really impacted everyone here. It's so clarifying. We've had a lot of positive feedback, Annette, just so helpful in bringing clarity, and just so many things that you're saying are, making good sense to everyone here. So this next question says, what are good practices to ensure that I'm not being reciprocally problematic when trying to address these things? Situations are often not black and white. Is there a place for self-accountability while not accepting blame shifting?
Well, I would say that self-responsibility might be to try to not react, to give yourself a little space and time to calm down before you respond. But you're really not to blame for blame shifting in any way. This is all on them. So I want to point out something. You will never hear an abuser say, is there something I can do? Is there something that I might be at fault for? They're never going to say that. You're saying that because you're an empathic person who desires emotional intimacy, self-respect, and safety. They are not that way. So empathic people will take on more responsibility than what is yours to take on. Don't do that. Start to advocate for yourself. You take care of you and see your partner as a separate person and stand up for yourself. That would be more impactful, is that you calmly and firmly clarify what is happening and stand up for yourself. Always keeping in mind safety, like I said, but I don't want to see you take on more responsibility. You're an empathic person. There's really, the only thing I can really think of is distancing yourself when you're really triggered so that you don't do what I used to do, which was like yell or cry, or I was reacting. It's a waste of time. It doesn't accomplish anything. It just makes you feel more ignored, more lacking of empathy. So I don't recommend that. And I don't know if that's something that you go through. I would just try to work on your trauma symptoms, but please don't take on more responsibility than what's yours.
Okay, Annette, we have a couple of people asking about the courses. I just want to address one thing. Excuse me, there is a course that you can recommend to a therapist. I've seen this question come through the chat, so I just want to make sure to address it. We have a CE course that is specifically designed for therapists.
Describe what CE is.
CE hours, when you are a therapist or a professional working in a similar field, you need to receive a certain amount of hours in order to keep your licensing in
continuing education.
Yeah. Continuing education hours, and it can be on various topics. And so we offer up to 9.5 CE hours for therapists, and we have received the most amazing feedback. It has been very equipping for them because, as we all know, abuse is far more prevalent than I think even many therapists and professionals realize. They're not trained in the way that they need to be trained. Annette knows how many hours they get in training is not quite enough. So our course really equips them to be able to respond in a manner that is safe and compassionate and healing and hopeful when they realize that they're dealing with abuse in their clients. So,
yeah, we actually teach them how to interface with the abuser in a more firm tone that requires that they take responsibility. And then those therapists that are working with a victim to align with them and to be compassionate and to help provide clarity, to help strengthen them. It's a really good course, and it's sanctioned by the American Psychological Association. So it's not just made up CEs. They will be able to apply it to their license.
Yes. So I want to make sure everybody knows that. If you have any questions on our courses, you can email us and we'll get you more specific information as well. We did have some questions about the survivor course, Annette, that you also referred to. And I did address those in the chat for everyone to see.
Okay. Thank you, Jill. Well, everyone, thank you so much for really engaging in this conversation today. I truly hope it was helpful. I want you to just be good to yourself and not take on this responsibility. It's so undermining. And I just really want you to see it for what it is and really learn the list, the terms and definitions, really study them and become familiar with them so that you're not blindsided, so you won't be triggered. You'll see it for what it is and you won't take it on. You will keep it on their side of the fence. I just really encourage that for you. Reach out to us if you have any further questions. We answer all of our emails. And if it's a question like related to this course, I will be answering your email. So just go to our info@themendproject.com. That's MEND, info@themendproject.com. And we'll get back to you. So in the meantime, until our next workshop, I hope that you will take really good care of yourself. Thank you for being here. Bye-bye.